Hello there, welcome back. Today I'm going to look at some horror movies for Halloween. I already did some horror movies last week, I'm going to do some more. My plan is also to do some indie horror films next week or two as well. So there's a whole range of horror movies. Because we all know that in Halloween, you may watch more in October, but you're going to keep on watching some after October. If you're a horror fan, so I'm going to do a few more. But today I'm going to talk about the Terrifier 2, Psycho Goreman, and Humanoids From The Deep, which I've got in this snazzy cover, from 88 films, with lots of extras. But I'm going to start with Terrifier 2. I covered Terrifier a few weeks ago in a video, and now the sequel is come out on the big screen and on video on demand. It was meant to have a token release in America of the one weekend, and then it'd be released a few weeks later on video on demand. But it did so well on the release in the cinemas, it keeps on getting brought back to more screens. So now it's, for a film that costs almost nothing, it's made like $8 million, which is quite a big jump from what it cost. So obviously there's going to be a Terrifier 3. There's no way there's not going to be a Terrifier 3 now. Which is good news, because this is a good film. It is a sequel and it's a different film. The good thing about this, and I'm not going to go into spoilers of this one, because it's a new film. I'm just going to give you my impressions. This is not going to be a deep video. The good thing about this film is, compared to the first one, it's a different film. It's not trying to be the same film. It kind of is like... The director's name is Damien Leone, like Sergio Leone. And the funny thing is, his approach to sequels seems to be like Sergio Leone's, is like, we're taking the basics of the original, but then we're going to do something. We're going to keep some stuff, but we're going to adjust other things. So it's a different film within the same genre. So the way that Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More feel very different films, this feels very different from the first one. The first one is a brutal suspense horror film that goes too far, but it takes place on one night, and you get like very basic characterization. You get one or two scenes of character before the horror starts. It's very stripped down, and it's done in almost an anthology. So you get a first half section and a second half section that are connected with one or two characters and the killer. But it's a development through that, and it's keeping the audience interested by switching character point of view, but it's pared down to the basics, and the person in the most character is the villain. The sequel is much more about the characters who are facing the villain. It's much more about sticking with them for a long time. The original was about an hour and a half, or maybe a bit long, but not much. The sequel's 2 hours 20. And most of that is really about the character work, rather than having much more of the clown. Like, the understanding that the clown needs a certain amount of time to be effective, but there's a point where that will get old. So the film is very good at not making sure that does not get old. The clown does not get old. So when the clown comes in, he's always a threat, but you're not seeing him all the time. You're not seeing him try to dominate the film in an unhealthy way. In this one, you actually have characters who you follow. In the first film, you had characters who you enjoyed watching, but you never got to know them that well. In this one, before the horror really starts, you get to know the characters a lot more. So the lead character is this girl who's still at school. She's got her friends. Her father has died. His father had a tumour and he's doing all these weird drawings. Parents' very traumatic experience. She's got a brother who she doesn't get on with that well, who thinks a bit nuts. And she's a mother who she's a strained relationship with. Now that sounds very cliche, but the film takes its time, so you actually get to see the nuances of the relationships. You realise just how traumatic, as it goes on, you realise how traumatic the father's death actually was, and that they're all still processing it. So they're a bit difficult with each other at times, but they're not. But they do love each other. They're affectionate towards each other. It's just you're seeing them. They're not quite sure how to deal with each other, and they respond in anger. But as once the threat becomes obvious, they stick up for each other. It's like it is a family. Ultimately, they are going to stick up for each other. So the characters are difficult, and in the sense that they're like people who make mistakes and who are overreacting at times, who don't act perfect, but they're all likable. You do like them. And the same with the friends. The friends are not perfect, but they are likable. So when something happens to anybody in the film, it has a far more impact than it did in the first film, because you have more time with these characters. So when something brutal happens, it has an impact. And brutality does happen, but it's spread out. Like, you have brutal things happening, like, every so often, but it's not like one thing after another after another. It's like, the film is patient to know that when you have something horrible happen, you really go for it, but you don't have it happen every 2 minutes. And you sprinkle it in with humour, with character work, with dialogue, so that when it happens, then when the clown comes in, he goes way beyond the pale for a villain, which makes him much more horrifying, because you like the people he's doing horrible things to. And the film is structured a little bit like Halloween. In a sense, you've got a girl, her friends, other people she knows, and it's about dealing with... So it's basically 3 girls versus a villain, just like Halloween. But it's got its own identity. It's just like it's taking that template and spreading it to a longer run timing. It's almost like if you had Halloween, but you got to really know Laurie as a messed up character rather than someone who's just used as a nice girl. That's the kind of difference. And of course, the kills are different. The kills in this one are far more brutal, far more horrific. And things happen to people that are completely unjustified. There's no defence for the villain, because it's a horror film. It's saying, look, horrible things happen to people, and horrible things happen to nice people. It's not just like it just happens to villains. No, this is going to happen to people you like, and that's going to make it more horrific. And that's what the film must be. Film's a real horror film. It's not just a plain genre film you get with a lot of these kind of horror films where it's like it's a bit safe, like, the jock will get killed, or this person you don't like will be killed, but the people you like are safe. No, this one is like, if you like a person, they're not safe. And even if a person survives this film, they will survive with many wounds. It's wonderfully brutal. It really is. I really enjoyed this one. I'm not sure I liked it more than the first one. It's one of those things that I've seen both of them once each. And my opinion at the moment is I liked the first one a little bit better because the first one was leaner. But that could change, because I could easily see myself liking this one a lot more because of character work and rewatches. So it's like the first one is a bit more of an initial punch. The second one is a bit more depth to it, so I may end up liking the second one more because of character stuff. And character stuff is things you can go back to a lot easier than the suspense things, really. At least for me, at least. I like character work in films, so there's a good chance I'll like this one more the further on. It'll be great. But there's definitely going to be a third part. But the film is refreshing because it is a horror film, and plus both of them are. They don't care about offending you. They will offend you. The villain is a psycho. There's no trying to make him seem decent in any way. He's a psycho. He enjoys hurting people in any way possible. He finds it funny. And there's nothing to do with... And he's supernatural in a weird, subtle way. And there's no way to deal with him. You just have to try and kill him. That's it. There's no way to talk him around. He does not talk. He mimes and he kills. And he enjoys killing them in brutal ways. And when he gets someone, he will go to work on their bodies in ways which are completely unjustifiable. So Terrifier 2 is recommended for people who like character-based horror, but also can take the gore. So now we're going on to Psycho Goreman. And Psycho Goreman was a film I heard about for the last few years, but I never actually watched. It was one of those ones I'll get around to that one. I heard it's good, I'll get around to it. I'm just kind of... I know, one of the things, you'll get to it eventually. It's just like, because it's so hyped up, in some ways you're like, just leave me alone, I'll get to it. And it turned out to be as good as the people said it was. It really is very enjoyable and very silly. And it's about this monster who destroys planets and is a total psychopath and is... If he lands on a planet, he's going to destroy it all. He used to be a slave and now he got some power from some magical thing and he just went completely mental. So he was imprisoned on Earth and then accidentally released by these two children who were playing a game in their backyard. And that's where the monster was hidden. But because the little girl has control over this one light that means that she can tell this monster what to do. And this is a little girl who's like 8 years old and is 8 to 10 years old. She's very much a psycho in her own way. She's ill-tempered, she's cruel to her brother, she wants everyone to do whatever she wants to do. Your worst nightmare is like a person you would hate to babysit. Because it's going to be a nightmare. This person has way too high an opinion of themselves and does not listen to other people, like, at all. So, this monster's controlled by this other different type of monster. And the family around that have to deal with the monster and deal with their daughter who now has way too much power. So basically it's a comedy with lots of gore. It's got so much gore. The effects are wonderful because they're cheesy, but it allows you to actually just throw in weird gags of gore constantly. It's really enjoyable. And it's silly constantly. So it allows them to be very satirical of the nuclear family and the ideal idea of the ideal husband and wife and their son and daughter and how that relationships are. And again, it's one of the things, but it's completely dysfunctional. The father is utterly lazy and in his own head and is a complete waste of space. The mother is run off her feet and is fed up with the father and can be a bit crazy because of that, dealing with the children all the time and being an authority figure to these children. Especially the girl who's insane and who is cruel to her brother. And the brother's a nice one. He's the one who takes the abuse, tries to keep going, but he is, he's the one who takes all the heat of the family, basically. So it's about this relationship and what happens when this monster comes into it. And there's just lots of fun throwaway gags. Like, you've got the gag with one of the friends is turned into this weird brain monster and never changes back. You've got policemen destroyed and turned into, like, bizarre creatures. You've got local gangsters getting destroyed. It's just so silly. I mean, it's obviously they found this situation I'm using. This guy with this monster, this deep voice, who, I will destroy you. And then he has to follow this little girl. That's a gag. And the fact that he's dealing with a little girl who has no interest in him beyond the power she gets from him. That's it. So it's a family dynamic with this absurd premise. And it really works. It's wonderful. Again, I'm trying to avoid, because it's still a fairly new film, I'm trying to give the idea of what it is without giving you away all the gags. There's a few gags I've given away, but most of it I'll let you see for yourself. But it is wonderful. The payoff's wonderful. Some of the character interactions as they go on are terrific. It's just a fun movie. So finally, we have Humanoids From The Deep. Now, this is one of those situations where the disc rated films is actually better than the film. The discs they have a commentary with Kim Newman and Sean Hogan, and another one by Sam Dagan. You have a documentary with the making of the film and all the changes they made to it. Because this is a film where the director shot stuff. The director shot the film, Barbara Peters shot the film. Then they brought in another director, a guy who did Battle Beyond the Stars, to add some stuff. And then they brought a second unit director in to add some more violence to it. And it's a film you can see there's lots of directors on it. It jumps around. It's a brief running time, but it does jump around a lot. It is kind of enjoyable. It's fun, but it's a film you know is a mess. It's a deep mess. You've got some decent actors in there, like Vic Morrow as the kind of villain, but he's not too villainous. You've got Doug McClure as the hero, but he's like a... At this point, Doug McClure was middle-aged and looked it. And that was the enjoyment of the character, was he wasn't the big macho lead man thing. But sometimes it's more effective than others. And you can get a sense that this is a film where the actors kind of came in, probably started energetic, with some scenes that seem energetic and other scenes that don't. So it's either reshoots that were involved in, or as the film went on, they started to realise that this film was doomed. Because in some scenes they're given a lot more than they're given in other scenes. And it's a weird one. There's some deleted scenes we saw the original, some shots, some scenes done by the original director without sound. And watching those scenes, you see why they reshot them. Because they are not very satisfying to look at. If you put that in a film, it wouldn't work. It's too coy for what they're trying to do. And the reason why it's too coy is because the actual idea of it all was pure exploitation. And I think the original director did not embrace that as much as Roger Corman expected. Because it is cheap and cheesy and nasty. And it's about these humanoids who are mutations and eat this mutated stuff that the scientists of this big company have let loose. They're coming to the surface and they're killing the men and raping the women. That's the premise. And the original director was a woman who would much prefer suggesting the rape rather than showing it. But the way she suggested it, if we see deleted scenes, doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But what they did is to go the exact opposite direction and go throw on as much as possible, much gore and as much nudity as possible, which also doesn't really work, because you can be crazy watching it going, oh, this is too much, this is way too much, you don't need this. So the film was torn between two different instincts, and somewhere in the middle was probably the best place for it. Because you now get a film that feels distasteful a lot of times. Anytime the monsters are near women, it does feel distasteful, and it does feel like it's too much of a pervert gag film. And the film does have a different feel to some of the dialogue scenes, because it's directed by women who is shooting in different ways. So a lot of the actresses, which is working with them, are more relaxed, and then suddenly for these weird horror scenes. And the funny thing is, she directs Doug McClure not to always be the centre of attention, and she directs Vic Morrow the same way, so they're not like macho characters trying to take over the film. It's much more amused with the sense of what these guys are doing and are annoyed by each other and things, and it works. Some of the dialogue scenes work. There's other dialogue scenes that don't work, that I think maybe from the same director, because it seems like she was either good with some actors and not good with other actors. I don't know what happened, but it feels very inconsistent. But again, it could be other directors coming in and shooting stuff, and maybe the actors weren't very comfortable with the other director. I don't know. This is a film that's a total mess. But the overseeing of it really feels like they messed up. Even though there's some fun scenes, when the monsters finally attack for the third act, attack the town thing, it is very enjoyable, very cheesy, and very silly. But it is pure exploitation, and there are just stuff in it throughout that just feels like you've gone too far. You don't need to do this. There was a middle ground you could have reached. And my guess is that they kept the original director saying, look, we need more in these scenes. Can you do more, but do it tastefully? You might have got something that worked a lot better than what you got. Because what you got is some stuff that's distasteful. And it doesn't really work. So it's a weird film. It's like, there's some stuff, the violence is enjoyable. Some of the monster violence is enjoyable. And I heard that was from the original director. But I think the premise is, because they want to rape the women so they can mutate through the women giving birth to these creatures, so they can go on land. And that whole idea needs to be done a certain way, and it's not covered right in this film. It feels like a Cronenbergian idea, not done by someone who has the confidence to do it right. And it's just one of those weird films that don't quite come together. So, this is the weakest film by a mile in what I'm talking about. This is by far the weakest film. Bizarrely, Terrifier 2 has much more brutal violence, and some of it towards women, that doesn't feel as offensive as this, because it is ultimately a fantasy and it is like actors agreeing to do this, rather than this film where they signed up for a film and then these other added nudity scenes in there that they didn't agree to in the first place, which makes the film feel strange and weird, and it just doesn't feel right. So that's the problem with that film. It just feels wrong. So I can't really recommend it, but if you like that kind of movie, you'll probably get some enjoyment, but it's not as good as it should be. So I hope you enjoyed this video talking about these 3 films. I would definitely recommend the first 2, third one, maybe not. So I'll see you later. Bye.